Imagine a palace wrapped in silence. The moonlight slips through carved wooden windows, falling on silk curtains swaying gently with the autumn wind. Deep inside, Korea's most powerful woman, Queen Min, rests in her chambers. She believes that even if politics rages outside the walls here, in her bedroom, she is safe. But she is wrong. On the night of October 8, 1895, assassins slipped past the royal guards. They were not thieves. They were not rebels acting on their own. They had a mission, sanctioned by shadows of political power. They crept closer, step by step, until the silence of the palace was pierced by 30 brutal stabs. The woman who had shaped Korea's destiny, a queen who dared to challenge empires, was butchered in her sleep. History, books call it an assassination, but what really happened that night was more than murder. It was a carefully engineered political purge meant to silence a woman who had become too powerful, too ambitious, and too dangerous for her enemies. Today, we step into the blood-stained chambers of Gyeongbokgung Palace. We will uncover the story of Queen Min, her rise, her enemies, and the night her body was torn apart by blades, while an empire trembled in fear. To understand why Queen Min's assassination shook an entire nation, we need to step back to the year 1851, when Min Jae-yong was born into a noble but declining family in Korea's Joseon dynasty. Her father died when she was still a child, leaving her in a vulnerable position. By the standards of her time, she was not supposed to play any major role in politics. She was expected to live quietly, like most noble women of the era. But fate had other plans. When King Gojong ascended the throne as a teenager, court officials searched for a suitable queen. They wanted someone from a respected family, but not someone so powerful that she would dominate politics. Min Jae-yong seemed like the perfect choice. Young, intelligent, and, they believed, politically harmless. At only 16 years old, she was chosen to become queen consort, later remembered as Queen Min. What the court underestimated, however, was her ambition and intelligence. Instead of remaining silent in the shadow of her husband, Queen Min began to insert herself into political decisions. She studied statecraft, learned about foreign powers, and quickly understood the delicate balance of Korea, which was trapped between giants like China, Russia, and Japan. For King Gojong, she became more than a wife. She became his most trusted advisor. For her enemies, she became a threat. By the 1870s, Queen Min was openly clashing with conservative court officials, blocking pro-Japanese factions, and aligning Korea closer to China and Russia. She was not the quiet, obedient queen they had expected. This transformation, from orphaned girl to one of the most powerful women in East Asia, was both her triumph and the reason for her downfall. As Queen Min's influence grew, so did the hatred against her. The palace, once a place of ritual and ceremony, became a battlefield of whispers. Behind the painted screens and candlelit corridors, her enemies plotted every detail of her downfall. By the late 1880s, Queen Min was no longer just a royal consort. She was the true strategist of Korea. She urged her husband, King Gojong, to resist Japan's growing control. She sought alliances with Russia, hoping to create a balance of power that could protect Joseon from domination. These decisions earned her powerful enemies in Tokyo and within her own palace. The tension inside Gyeongbokgung Palace was suffocating. Ministers who once bowed to her began avoiding her gaze. Servants carried rumors in hushed tones that assassins had been spotted near the palace gates, that Japanese advisors had demanded the queen's removal. Queen Min herself began to feel the weight of paranoia. The corridors that once echoed with court music now carried the sound of her own footsteps, quick, cautious, and restless. Nightmares plagued her sleep. She dreamt of faceless men with blades, of shadows slipping into her chamber, of blood staining the palace floors. Outside, the world was shifting. Japanese influence grew bolder. Armed soldiers patrolled Seoul. Inside the palace, Queen Min's guards were bribed or intimidated into silence. Each day she found herself surrounded by fewer loyal faces. Her body began to show the strain. Court physicians noted her exhaustion, her constant headaches, her fading appetite. But it was not illness that hollowed her eyes, it was fear. Fear that each passing night might be her last. The whispers soon turned into open threats. Japanese officials made it clear, if Korea did not bow to their vision, Queen Min would have to be removed. But in politics, removal rarely meant exile. It meant blood. The palace, once her fortress, was now her prison. Every creak of the wooden floor, every gust of wind against the windows sounded like the footsteps of killers approaching her chambers. She was right. They were coming. It was just before dawn on October 8, 1895. The palace lay wrapped in silence, broken only by the crackling of oil lamps and the faint chirping of night insects. Queen Min, exhausted from endless nights of fear, had finally fallen into a restless sleep. But outside, shadows gathered. Dozens of armed men, Japanese agents and hired Korean collaborators, slipped past the palace gates. Their blades glinted in the torchlight. They carried one mission: eliminate the queen. The assassins moved like hunters stalking prey. Loyal guards who stood watch were either cut down or bribed into silence. The palace that once protected Queen Min had become a labyrinth of betrayal. They burst into her private chambers. Startled attendants screamed but were quickly silenced. Queen Min awoke to chaos, men in dark uniforms storming toward her bed. She struggled to rise, her silk robes tangling around her arms. What followed was not a swift execution but a brutal frenzy. The assassins struck her again and again, their blades tearing through fabric and flesh. Witnesses later whispered that she was stabbed more than 30 times. The Queen of Korea, once the most powerful woman in East Asia, was reduced to a broken figure on the palace floor. But the horror did not end there. To erase every trace of her, the assassins dragged her lifeless body into the palace gardens. There they poured kerosene over her remains and set them ablaze. The flames rose into the early morning sky, carrying with them the last breath of Queen Min. When dawn broke, the official court records remained silent. Her murder was masked under vague language. An unfortunate incident, a necessary removal. No mention of the brutality. No acknowledgement of the ashes still smoldering in the gardens. Those who dared to speak of that night vanished. Palace servants were silenced, witnesses threatened, reports destroyed. The truth of Queen Min's death was meant to be buried forever, yet whispers survived. They told of a queen betrayed in her sleep, stabbed 30 times and burned until nothing remained but smoke. A haunting reminder of how far power will go to silence a voice. The death of Queen Min was not just the end of a life, it was the end of a nation's fragile independence. With her gone, the balance of power in Korea collapsed almost overnight. Queen Min had been the strongest barrier against Japanese dominance. She had worked tirelessly to bring Russia, China, and other Western nations closer to Korea, building alliances that could shield her country. But once she was silenced, that shield shattered. The Japanese wasted no time. Only weeks after her assassination, pro-Japanese officials tightened their grip on the Korean throne. King Gyeongbokgung, her devastated husband, was reduced to a puppet ruler. Stripped of his queen's courage and strategy, he could do little but bow to foreign demands. For the people of Korea, it was as if the soul of their kingdom had been ripped away. News of Queen Min's murder spread in whispers and rage erupted in the streets. Farmers, peasants, and scholars alike mourned her as a martyr. But the Japanese crackdown was swift. Protesters were crushed, dissidents jailed, and anyone who dared honor the queen risked imprisonment or worse. Internationally, the assassination sent shockwaves. Russia condemned the act, while Western diplomats whispered of Japan's rising aggression. Yet no nation intervened with real force. In the great game of empires, Korea was simply too small, too vulnerable. Within just a decade, Japan formally annexed Korea, transforming it into a colony. Many Koreans would later look back and say, the night Queen Min was stabbed 30 times was the night Korea lost its freedom. Her death became more than a crime. It became a turning point. The brutal flames that consumed her body also lit the path toward colonization, war, and decades of suffering for an entire people. In the silence of history, Queen Min's screams are still there, unheard but unforgettable. They echo through the palaces of Seoul, carried by the wind that brushes against the old palace gates where she once walked with dignity. The official records tried to erase her. The assassins burned her body, hoping that nothing of her would remain. But ash cannot silence memory. The image of a queen dragged from her chambers, stabbed again and again, and finally burned under the night sky, became a wound carved deep into the soul of Korea. Some say her ghost still lingers in Gyeongbokgung Palace. Guards and night workers whisper of strange cries in the corridors. Cold winds in locked rooms and shadows that move where no one stands. For them, it is as if the queen herself is still searching, not for revenge but for the justice she never received, and justice never truly came. None of the masterminds behind her assassination ever faced real punishment. Most lived comfortably while her name was deliberately blackened by propaganda. But history has a way of remembering what politics tries to bury. Today, Queen Min is honored as Empress Myeongseong, a symbol of defiance, intelligence, and tragic sacrifice. Her brutal end remains one of the darkest moments in East Asian history. Not just because she was murdered, but because her death marked the slow, painful death of a nation's independence. The night she was stabbed 30 times, Korea itself began to bleed. And so ends the tragic tale of Queen Min, a woman whose intelligence and courage made her powerful, but whose brutal death revealed just how fragile power can be. Stabbed 30 times, burned so that no trace remained, and erased from records, yet even in death, she became unerasable. But now the question is for you. Do you believe Queen Min's assassination was simply the act of violent political enemies? Or was it part of a much larger foreign conspiracy? Could her survival have changed the future of Korea forever? History hides as much as it reveals, and sometimes the darkest truths are the ones deliberately buried. Tell me in the comments below what you think, and if you want me to uncover more horrifying stories of betrayal, torture, and forgotten executions, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next tale. Until then, beware. History never truly sleeps.